Hey everyone, and welcome back. So yes, it's true, I have finally bought a PS5. Now today's video, don't worry, for anyone who loves the Switch content, isn't to announce a refocus of the channel. We will still be almost solely focused on the Nintendo Switch. If there is any PS5 coverage, it will be very few and far between, and really when it fits into the schedule in beside the different Switch items. And really, for anyone who comes to the streams or watches them, this won't even come as a surprise because I've talked about it many times. I've actually already owned it for a couple of months now. So then you might wonder, what's today's video about? Well, rather than talk about PlayStation games or a new focus for the channel, we're just going to be modding my PlayStation 5 controller, as well as reshelling the PlayStation 5 itself. Now, once again, this is not a sponsored video, but yes, all the modding kits have been provided by Extremerate. And if ever you want to pick up any products for yourself, you can always use my affiliate links down below. It'll help out the channel a little bit at the same time. And also let Extremerate know that I'm the one who sent you guys. Not only that, but there's a code for a 10% off the products. So you can check that down below in the description of the video or the top pinned comment. Now, without further ado, let's get to changing this regular old PS5 and controller into this PS5 and this controller. Oh, and just remember, if you are liking the video, hit that like button and subscribe if you aren't already. Now, calling this first part an actual mod is a little bit of a stretch because even Sony themselves have made the panels of the PS5 replaceable. However, as you'll see in the kit that we'll go through with Extremerate, they've even gone a touch beyond just panel replacement. So first of all, let's take a quick look at how you remove the panels of the PlayStation. Now you start where the PlayStation symbol is. All you need to do is lift up the corner and you just push downwards away from the PlayStation symbol. And you'll see your side will pop right off just like that. So here we have our replacement panel. Now all you've got to do is place it over where they're supposed to go, press down and then up towards where the PlayStation symbol was, which is the top corner here, till you hear a click that everything has been engaged. Now, remember that your PlayStation symbol was here, because when you flip it over to the other side, it will be this opposing corner that you have to lift and push down. That's how we are going to disengage the other panel. And you basically repeat the same process to get the other panel on. Now, theoretically speaking, if all you wanted to do was repanel your PS5, you could actually stop here, and you'd already have a really original looking console. However, as I mentioned, Extremerate did not stop there. Now, first of all, if we come to what would normally be the underside of the PS5, first we're going to clean this section up, and they've given us two wipes. First, you wipe it with a wet wipe, then you dry it with a dry wipe. Now, what they've provided also in the kit are two little add-ons here that you can stick to the bottom of your PS5 to actually improve its stability. One is going to go like so. The other one is going to go on the top. And lastly, you also have a couple of extra ones to make sure that the shell itself doesn't get scratched. So you're going to have one that you're going to be placing right here at the top. And second one right here at the top like so. We're just going to remove the sticky filament. And then as I mentioned, we have one final one that we lay here for someone that lays their PlayStation down flat. Like so. And we are now good to go for the extra supports. But that's still not all. Because yes, they even provide a vinyl cover for the black section of the PlayStation. I'm going to do my absolute best to place this vinyl sticker, but just to be totally honest with you, I am absolutely terrible at this, so let's just hope it turns out good. We're going to want to take a part of the sticker off and really line it up here with the start of the panel. Now, as we move across the panel, you want to make sure that there's no air bubbles under the sticker. And there we are. You know what? It turned out pretty darn good. I'm actually quite surprised. Like I said, normally I'm absolutely terrible at doing this. But you know what? It was worth the extra effort. So just before we actually mod our PS5 controller, let's take a quick look at the kits that we'll be using. Now the first part of the kit that we'll be using is the kit to replace the bottom panel. Now the good news is that if this is the only part you actually want to replace on your controller, all you need is a prying tool. And the process is actually very quick. But today we're going to be replacing the full front of the controller, so as you'll see the process is quite a bit longer than if you were only replacing this part. Now the second part we're going to be using is this zombie front place replacement. There's also a replacement here for the touchpad that you'll see when we get the finished product. This one comes with some screws, a screwdriver, and another prying tool. Now if you are going for a full front plate replacement like we're going to be doing today, just get prepared, you're going to have to take your controller apart quite a bit. Now if you're wondering why I didn't get the front plate that actually matches the shell I used for the PS5 itself, it's because I'm actually modding this controller for a friend and I won't have time to do both today, so I'm using his for the video. So now as you can see, I've set apart all the extra parts here because we have to start by dismantling the controller. The only thing we'll need to do that is the prying tool and the screwdriver. Now the next step is actually we have to pry off the front panel. And that's where I was saying earlier that if this is the only part you're replacing, you'll almost be done at this next step. Now for this one, what we need to do is we need to fit the prying tool down here. And basically, this should just pop off pretty easily. And you just remove it from the controller. Now next, we're going to return to where we removed the R1 and L1 buttons. And we're going to remove the two screws here that were under those buttons. Now, as I'm removing the screws, I always try to keep them ordered. Basically, these will be the first screws I removed, so we're going to be working reversely when we're going to be putting them back. I'm going to be putting each set of screws on a different line here. Whichever system you use, just try to keep track of which screws went where. Now next, we're going to flip the controller over, and we have matching screws at the bottom here. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to remove these. Now next, we should be able to remove the whole back section of the controller. You have two clips that are right here. All you need to do is fit your prying tool underneath, unclip each one of these, and then basically your whole back section of the controller should come right off. Now the first thing that I like to do when we get here is take out the battery. I want to make sure that we don't cause any shorts or anything while we're working on the controller. So basically all you have to do is disconnect the disconnector right here. You pull your battery out, you set it aside for later. Now at this point, we have 3 more screws that we're going to remove at the next step. 1, 2, and 3. So we're going to go straight into that. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the battery plate here. Just be careful, there is a sensor down here that you're going to want to remove first, just so you don't damage it. So you can just pop it off. Normally it should untab very easily, and then you can just completely remove the battery plate. Once again, set that aside. We'll need it obviously later when we're going to rebuild the controller. Now for the next step, we have 4 different ribbon cables that we're going to need to detach. One down here, one on each side, and one at the top. Now each of them, all you need to do is pull lightly straight out and the ribbon cable should just come right out of their assemblies. There's also these blue tabs that when they're accessible and easily accessible, you just pull on the blue tab and they will come right out. Now with those 4 ribbon cables removed, we can now remove the whole rear assembly here. Now, what I recommend you do is you just push on the joystick from the front of the controller, and you'll see they should pop right out. Now we're just going to flip it over. We don't need to detach it any further. Now we have access to everything we need. The only thing you're going to generally want to do here, if it isn't situated, is just remove here the little light sensor. It's better if you set it off to the side, make sure it doesn't get damaged. Sometimes it stays here in right where it was situated, but in my case, it actually stayed stuck to the rear assembly. So in that case, just remove it. Now there is one last step that you might have to do depending on which version of this controller that you have. Some controllers have a brace here. You'll see it's a white piece of plastic and you'll have 2 extra screws to remove on either side to remove the brace. In this case, this controller seems to be an earlier model. It doesn't have the brace yet. So if your controller is like this, you are pretty much finished detaching the inside assembly. All you need to do is wiggle it free. And basically, we are now at the front part of the controller shell. So now at this point, all we need to do is detach all the various buttons here at the front. However, obviously, you're going to want to keep all these pieces because you'll need them to put them back in your new faceplate. I like to separate them individually, keep everything together that goes together. Just wiggle it and you'll see there are little clips on the sides and top. Eventually, you'll get it free. Now, you will need this once again, so please be careful with it. Now, you also have this little sensor here at the front. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to detach it, and then you're going to gently pass it through. Now, the last part you're going to need is this part right here. It is a support for the buttons. You're going to need to pry it free a bit. Once again, just be gentle. Make sure not to damage it as you go. But normally, once you've got one corner free, all the rest will follow along. Now, if you don't have replacement rings like I do for your controller, you're also going to have to detach these rings here. All you need to do is basically pull up on them and the rings will come right off. Now, obviously, it's up to you, but I always recommend that you keep the original parts of the controller. You never know if one day you're going to want to go back, so I do recommend you keep these. So now, obviously, comes the fun part. We have to do everything we just did, but in reverse with the new front shell. Now, first of all, if you're wondering how to place this in the controller, if you look, there is an arrow here right in the middle. The arrow always has to be pointing up. So basically, you're going to place that with the arrow pointing up. You're going to press it down. And you'll see that either way, once you get the controller assembled, the pressure of reassembling the controller will push it all the way in if it isn't already. Next, we're going to place the little button here in the middle. Now that should snap right in place with the assembly. Next, we're going to flip it over and we're going to place our sensor. Now when you place the sensor, what you want to make sure is that number one, the little tab here goes into the plastic part here. And secondly, that the little notch in the actual ribbon cable lines up with the little notch in the controller. Now we can get started on the buttons. Normally there's only one place they can fit in, so even if you don't quite remember which button goes where, there's not really any way that you can actually make a mistake. Next, we're going to replace our gel pads. Then we can move on to the D-pad. The D-pad is going to have one little tab telling you which way it actually goes in. We're going to replace our PlayStation button right here in the middle. Once again, with its pad right over. You'll see that to put it the right way around, there are 2 little holes in the top of the pad that fit into 2 pegs. If you're putting them the wrong way, basically the pegs won't have any holes to peg into. Now next, we have to put our start and select buttons back in. Now these also have only one way they can fit. If you try to fit them in the wrong way, you'll see they won't fit. And even if you try to put them on the wrong side, they just won't fit. If they don't easily slide back in, that means you aren't placing the right button in the right spot. Now at this point, we've got all our buttons back in our front faceplate. However, we're not done with the hard part. There is one last hard part we have to do because we also have a replacement for the touchpad. So we're going to have to work on this next. So you just can set this aside. I like doing this first just because it helps to remember where all the buttons went if you do it right after you deassemble it. Now, once again, for this touchpad, depending on which version of the controller you have, you might have 1 or 2 screws. This is an earlier model, there's only 1 screw, but you could have a second one on the other side. Now, it's actually a fun thing that we have one of these older model touchpads here. The reason why is that there's actually a trick to disassembling it. If you have the 2 screw model, you'll see once you take out those 2 screws, you just pull straight up and the assembly will come apart. If you have the 1 screw model, you actually have to push away from the screw, wiggling it around, and there's a little latch on the inside. I'll show it to you once we have it detached, but here it is. Basically, this little claw here latches into this little pin. I don't know if you can see it on the control on the camera, but this little pin was fitting into this little latch, and that's why when you have the 1 screw model, there's a little trick to disassembling it. Now comes the fun part. What we're going to have to do next is we're going to have to heat up the PCB here. Now I'm going to be using a heat gun. However, you can do this with a regular hairdryer. Obviously, the regular hairdryer is going to take longer to heat up the PCB, and once it's hot enough, you should be able to pull the PCB apart from the front touchpad. Because obviously we need this PCB, we just don't need the front touchpad because we are going to be replacing it with this awesome one that fits in with our skull model. Now, if you don't have a heat gun, don't feel bad. It's actually safer with a blow dryer. If you're not used to using a heat gun, you could actually heat it up too much and start melting the plastic and then cause a whole other load of issues. However, if you're doing it with a hairdryer, it'll be very hard to get it hot enough to where the plastic would actually melt or fuse to the PCB. So all you need to do is heat it as evenly as possible, moving the air around the PCB, and then basically trying to detach it. So you come back to it, you heat it for 15-20 seconds, you see if it's starting to detach. It's not, you heat it another 15-20 seconds, try to detach it, until you get to the point where the two will separate. That could take a lot of minutes, and I would say patience is the key here. You're better to go slow and steady than try to do it quickly. Now I'm going to mute this section of the video because the actual sound in the microphone from the heat gun is just going to be awful for your ears, and we're going to separate this PCB. Now, once you have it detached, you're going to take your new front plate and you're going to place your PCB. Now, always make sure when you replace the PCB that obviously the cable is on the right side. If your cable is on the left side, you're putting it in backwards. You're definitely not going to want to do that. Now, next, you're going to want to replace the socket. This is from your original controller. Now, the only thing is that if you have the 1 screw model, you're going to have to use the replacement backplate here so that you have now 2 screws in its place. And this is why they give you a few extra screws in the kit, because in this case, since we don't have that second screw from our original controller, I'm going to take one of the extra screws that came in the kit so that we can actually have it properly installed. Now we can grab our front assembly back and get the touch sensor back in place. Now once we have the touch sensor back in place, now we can start the true reassembly of the controller. Now when you're at this step, don't forget that if you did remove this button here, to put it right back in before replacing the PCB with your 2 joysticks. Now as you're putting it together, you're going to want to make sure that your flex cables go through where they're supposed to. So for example, up here. So once you have the 4 ribbon cables in place, we can work on putting the battery holder back in. Now you're going to want to slide this one right into place. you'll see that once it gets to the right spot, it'll drop right in. Now I'm going to secure this right away with a screw, just so that all our PCBs and all that stop moving around. Next, we're going to replace the screws on each side of the controller here. Now at this point here, if ever you're missing a screw or anything like that, don't worry, you can always use one of the ones that come with the kit. For these, you're going to want to use the black shorter screws. Now next, you're going to want to make sure that you replace the little sensor right here at the back of the controller. One of the most important parts, do not forget to plug the battery back in. Now we're at the final steps. We're going to put our back panel back on. Everything should snap back into place. Now we're going to replace our 2 screws at the bottom of the controller. Now next, you're going to want to place your rings. So once you get your rings into the groove, you'll just be able to press them in. You're going to want to place the 2 replacement rings around each one of the joysticks. Next, we have our final 2 screws here to place at the top. Now, if you see one screw left, that's the black screw that I replaced in the controller, just to show you that you could use the screws from the kit as a replacement. So now we're at the last steps. We're just going to replace our replacement here. Now you're going to want to take these 2 little tabs and get those in first. Just wiggle it into place. When it's in place, you'll just hear it click down. And normally it should click all into place automatically down here. Just give it a nice push. Make sure all the little clips are engaged. And then our very final step, placing our L1 and R1 buttons back in. And that button almost tried to run away. And now, as you can see, we have a beautiful, fully modded controller. And I've already tested it with Astro's Playroom. All the functionalities are working. So we lost no functionalities. The touchpad works perfectly, even with this replacement faceplate. And as you can see, it really adds a nice dimension of flair to your PS5 controller. And let's be honest, this is way cheaper than going out and buying a special edition. So by putting in just about 30 to 45 minutes of work, you can get a really, really nice job done. So here are my final thoughts. Now, although the PS5 controller is definitely not the easiest controller to reshell, I do think that the final product really is worth the effort. The only thing as you're modding the controller, be very careful with those little ribbon cables. You can snap and break them. You can always buy replacements, but it would suck not being able to use your controller for a couple of weeks while you wait for that to come in. However, the console reshell is really the part that amazed me even more. Number one, it is super easy. It took me under 10 minutes to switch the plates on the console and even apply that vinyl sticker. And I really like the fact that it adds a little bit of originality to the console. And also, since the console is so darn big, it makes it more appealing when it stands out in your living room. Now, however, if there is one thing I would like to see, is some licensed faceplates. Now, I'm not talking about first-party licenses. Sony will never give those up, and they'll probably do them themselves. But maybe you can reach out to some of the bigger indie developers or third-party developers and get some cheap licenses out there and some panels for fans of those series. But overall, these are some really fun mods to do. And Extremerate makes some very high-quality products, and honestly, I really go to them automatically for most of my modding stuff if they make the things I'm looking for. I think I've been working with them now on and off for almost 3 years on the channel, going from retro stuff to modern stuff. Rarely do I have any gripes at all with their products. Now let me know what you think. Are you going to be picking up some new faceplates for your PS5? Are you going to be reshelling your controller? Let me know in the comments down below. And as I said earlier, don't forget, affiliate links are down below in the top pinned comment and description of the video. And on the way out, hit that like button, subscribe if you aren't already, click on the notification bell so you know when all my future videos come out. And as usual, hope I'll see you in my next video.